Thank you all very much for inviting me to Huck again. It's a little bit different this time than it was, I think, the last two or three times. Um, there's a couple things I'd like to mention in the outset before I get into my talk. First, I would like to just sort of provide you with a little bit of a content warning. Some of the stuff that I'll be discussing today will involve mental health, and I will be discussing a section will talk about suicide a little bit. So just know that those are coming. But I promise you it will be uplifting. But we're going to talk about some heavy stuff, and then we're going to talk about some inspiring stuff. And then second of all, I really like to dedicate my talk today to Bill Zering, who passed away. He was a very kind and sweet man to me when I came and talked last time. We had a wonderful conversation afterwards about life and God and the cosmos and all of that. And he inspired me to read a book that meant something to him, which was called The Saviors of God. And I read that, and we discussed things via email. And yeah, he was just a really cool guy, and I'm really glad that I had to interact with him a little bit. So today is dedicated. My talk today is dedicated to him. The last normal day was March 12th, my wife's birthday. It started as any day for me did back then, with a late wake up, quick shower, and easy commute. Once I got to the office, however, the mood was noticeably stressed. While we all tried to focus on our individual tasks, our minds were preoccupied with only one thing: COVID-19. Since the first case in the United States was found in Washington state that January of 2020, we all wondered if it would spread. Initially, I thought that it could be handled, much like how the United States dealt with previous pandemics like SARS or Ebola. But as time went on, I realized that this time things were different. We all wondered if, and more likely when, we'd be working from home. Unlike the millions of service workers across the country, I was a steady office job, one that could largely be done in the comfort of my home. Despite this, I hoped that life would continue on as is, that this disease wouldn't spread, that people's lives wouldn't be lost, and we could devote our collective energies towards more meaningful, helpful things. I pulled out all the stops for Kaylee's birthday. I gave her some great gifts, including a countertop griddle that she loved, bought her some candy and flowers, and took her out to dinner. While we were eating that night at one of our favorite restaurants, we both tried to put on a brave face and act like nothing was off kilter, but we really couldn't. That day, she had learned her job would switch full-time to remote starting the following Monday. And this fact put a damper on our evening. We went home and tried to relax as best we could, not knowing what the future would hold. Over a year later, the United States is still in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. With over 32 million cases and over 500,000 deaths, this is the largest public health crisis in a century. Due to lockdowns and social distancing, the country is also experiencing the largest economic downturn since the Great Recession a little over a decade ago. Millions have lost their jobs, their homes, and their livelihoods. With more than 3 million vaccine doses delivered every day, and over a quarter of the country being fully vaccinated, there's still much to be done. I have been working remotely or semi-remotely since March 18th of last year. I've tried to set up a home office as best I can, which has gotten better since Kayla and I moved into our first home back in October. The money we used as a down payment was originally money set aside for a Seattle vacation, but as with most things during the age of COVID, that was put on hold. Having a partner during all of this has been indispensable. We've been able to comfort and support each other during this extremely isolating time. However, there are many Americans that haven't been as lucky. As John Leland wrote just weeks after the lockdowns began in the New York Times, American seniors have been dealt a devastating blow by COVID. It has limited their ability to socialize, receive food and medicines, and even celebrate birthdays. He quoted Legira Cooper, a 17-year-old, 17, I said that wrong. He quoted Legira Cooper, a 72-year-old who no longer enjoyed the social gatherings at her local LGBT senior center, calling her situation a self-imposed prison. I can clean my house and work on a book I'm supposed to be writing, she lamented, but it's the missing of talking to people in another setting. I don't mind being by myself. I mind being forced to be by myself. You can't go anywhere. You can't be around people. For others, the COVID lockdowns have led to new or exacerbated mental health issues, from depression and anxiety to even thoughts of suicide. As the Kaiser Family Foundation poll found early in the days of the pandemic, nearly half of Americans say that this pandemic is already affecting their mental health. This places an enormous strain on the mental health care system, whose transition to the digital age has been hastened by the pandemic. In an article by Moana Ravindranath in Politico noted, even with the new flexibility to practice remotely, mental health providers are still struggling on multiple levels. They're trying to adapt the telehealth visits without sacrificing the personal connection to the people they help. They're trying to navigate a maze of licensing rules while figuring out what the emergency flexibility really means. And they are trying to accommodate growing numbers of online patients facing depression, fear, grief, panic, isolation, and economic distress, often on top of mental health conditions they had before the pandemic. The rules surrounding telehealth often advantage those with higher incomes, better internet services, and more reliable health insurance, leaving poor and working class Americans scrambling for solutions. There's also been an uptick in thoughts of suicide, especially in young people. As William Wan recently wrote in the Washington Post, when the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently asked young adults if they had thought about killing themselves in the past 30 days, 1 in 4 said they had. Like with telehealth, the United States' medical infrastructure has not kept up with the needs of its people, as funding and prevention efforts have continued to lag far behind those for all other leading causes of death. Juan shares the story of Christian Robbins, a 16-year-old from Washington State who died by suicide 1 month into the pandemic. His father, Ted, recalls how his son told him that a voice inside was whispering how worthless he was and how he was hated by everyone, exacerbated by a lack of in-person connections with his friends. Why aren't school districts reaching out to students who have problems, Robbins said. Why aren't we as a country doing anything about this part of the pandemic that's killing people we love? Love, much like human connection, often feels lost in the age of COVID. On a personal level, I haven't seen my grandmother in person in well over a year. I haven't received her hugs, held her hand, or even shared a meal with her. I also haven't seen a live concert, taken a vacation, or spent an evening with friends. Everything is now mediated by masks and screens, even this very presentation. I imagine many of you, like me, are tired of social interaction via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. They call it Zoom fatigue, and it's very much real. Vinesh Ramachandran, writing in the Stanford News, discussed research indicating 4 reasons why we get burnout on Zoom. First is excessive amounts of close-up eye contact that is highly intense. Due to text being too large on the screen, which simulates a stressful encounter in real life. The second cause is seeing yourself way too much, as we're not built to see ourselves while simultaneously interacting with others. In the real world, if somebody was following you around with a mirror constantly, so that while you were talking to people, making decisions, giving feedback, getting feedback, you were seeing yourself in a mirror, that would just be crazy. No one would ever consider that, commented Professor Jeremy Bailenson, founding director of the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab. Third, Zoom meetings limit our natural inclination to move around when we talk, as the field of vision is static, leading to less than optimal cognitive outcomes. And finally, Zoom just takes too much cognitive load, since we have to work harder to send and receive signals. So how do we combat Zoom fatigue? Bailenson and his colleagues provide a few pointers to make it more enjoyable, or at the very least less miserable. Making the program window smaller, using the hide self-view function, periodically moving back or away from your camera, or even occasionally turning off all video can help you avoid Zoom fatigue. I've tried all of these techniques and they've helped me a lot. I find myself not hating my computer towards the end of a heavy meeting workday. It can also make social video chats more enjoyable. I do monthly video chats with 2 friends from Germany, and each of us takes bathroom or snack breaks to knock the cobwebs off our brains from prolonged screen exposure. None of this will ever replace the joy of seeing people in person, but it will make our virtual lives in the age of COVID more bearable. Okay, Thrown a lot at you so far, some of which has been super heavy. This pandemic has a way of blunting your sense of humor or limiting your ability to enjoy things in life. Indoor hobbies can only take you so far. For me, reading is my ultimate joy, but even doing that for too long burns me out. Until we get back to some semblance of normalcy, we need to reconsider the roles of society and solitude in our lives. And there's someone from 19th century America who can help us do just that. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the minister turned iconic writer and lecturer of pre Civil War America, often grappled with the balance between society and solitude in his own life. A quiet, poor son of a widowed mother, Emerson entered Harvard University at 1817 at just 14 years old. While his academic performance never rose to the level of his elite peers, he nevertheless used his years at Harvard to study religion, philosophy, and politics. As author Carl Bodie writes in his introduction to the Portable Emerson, the young author's journals reveal that moral problems were already a prime interest, something that his college exercises had previously hinted at. Is virtue based on civilization? He wondered, for instance. He prepared embryo essays on such subjects as sympathy, human nature, and providence. To quench his thirst for spiritual answers, Emerson continued his studies at the Harvard Divinity School while keeping a day job as a teacher. Like many during the COVID pandemic, Emerson lost someone dear to him due to a respiratory illness. His first wife, Ellen Louisa Tucker, died less than 2 years into their marriage of consumption, what we know today as tuberculosis. As he wrote in his diary, "Oh, willingly, my wife, I would lie down in your tomb." This experience changed Emerson, personally and professionally. He gave up more of his traditional religious beliefs, such as immortality, and began to forge a new spiritual outlook, known to history as transcendentalism. As Bodie writes, he avoided the supernatural in favor of the moral and the ethical. He began to develop the idea of compensation. There is a Christian compensation, he told himself and his hearers, for many afflictions in life, including the loss of a loved one. He expounded on the idea of self-trust. Though he preached that self-reliance was God-reliance, there was as much self as God in it. Emerson held a person's individuality to be a sacred gift, one imbued with a sense of deep responsibility and reward for those who grasp it. By the 1830s, he parlayed his ideas through books and lectures, and he earned a substantial part of his living by his and did so with a minimum of compromise. In many ways, he became America's moral conscience, speaking out against the evils of slavery, imperialism, and the ethnic cleansing of Native Americans. Nature was sacrosanct to Emerson. He gave it near total primacy over everything else. As he wrote in his iconic book, also titled Nature, every natural process is a version of a moral sentence. To illustrate this concept, Bodie explained, we see that a fractured bone which heals well becomes stronger than before. A healing bone, a natural process, is also a moral process in which one's body grows stronger through regrowth and renewal. In the era of COVID, I think this concept holds special weight. For those who recover from the disease as a result of the natural gifts of both body and medicine, they will have persevered through great adversity and with faith in themselves and others, hopefully are stronger than before. As our bodies heal, so do our souls. Most folks who've read Emerson encountered him in middle or high school, and it was likely his legendary essay, Self-Reliance. In it, he praised those who blazed a trail for their own lives, never falling privy to the negative consequences of the masses. He also warned against blind acceptance of good luck, for life has a way of overturning our most cherished successes. He writes, A political victory, a rise of rents, the recovery of your sick, or the return of your absent friend or some other favorable event raises your spirit, and you think good days are preparing for you. Do not believe it. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. On the surface, this might sound to you like cold individualism, but it's nothing of the sort. In reality, Emerson is pleading with his listeners to enjoy those moments of fortune, but not accept them as determined. The choices that affect our individual lives, as well as the lives of those around us, represent a gallant struggle for our values against the cosmic forces that test them. This pandemic is one of those moments. It challenges us to do better for ourselves and others, regardless of whether the outcome is positive or negative. This brings us to Emerson's 1857 essay, Society and Solitude, the inspiration for my talk today. This work is classic Emerson, wherein he celebrates the need for individual space, while also calling for the need of real social uplift and personal companionship. To a culture of the world, an Archimedes, a Newton, is indispensable, so she guards them by a certain aridity, he wrote. If these had been good fellows, fond of dancing, port, and clubs, we should have had no theory of the sphere, and no Principia. They had that necessity of isolation which genius feels. In other words, solitude protects genius from the follies of social life, engendering in them an incapacity for strict association, or in today's language, antisocial personalities. Like with self-reliance, this seems a bit callous, but I think there's a better reading. Emerson is getting at what makes humans capable of doing exceptional things. And in his mind, it's harder to do said things when your life is consumed with excessive social functions. We need time to separate from the world, to recharge our batteries and think deeply about what matters to us. We can't do any of that when we're always on screens, either for work or for fun. A potential positive of this pandemic is that it's given all of us the time to think deeply and earnestly about our lives. But solitude is not enough. We also need society. As he explained, a man must be clothed with society. We shall feel a certain barrenness and poverty as of a disciplined and unfurnished member. Just as we can be overwhelmed by too much society, we can also be overwhelmed by too little. It is imperative that we as social creatures make meaningful and rewarding relationships with others to stave off loneliness and emotional pain. Emerson beautifully explains this dichotomy in a further passage. Now and then, a man exquisitely made can live alone, and must, but coop up most men, and you undo them. Additionally, humanity can only achieve great things when they work together on common goals, rather than as atomized subjects grasping towards uplift. Concert fires people to a certain fury of performance they can rarely reach alone, he wrote. This is no doubt the case during the COVID pandemic. Millions of people in the United States and around the world have started mutual aid networks to feed and protect the vulnerable, collaborated on cutting-edge medicines for treatment of the virus, and developed multiple vaccines that might ultimately put the scourge of COVID behind us. We are living through history. And those of us who survive this crisis will talk about it for decades. It is one of the defining characteristics of our era. With so much going wrong in this world, it's easy to get cynical, to throw up your hands and give up. But that's not the lesson I wanted to impart today. Each of us has been shaped by this crisis, and the test of our will is in finding out how we respond to it. As such, Emerson's insights provide us with one voice and a chorus of wisdom that will guide us forward. In the closing paragraph of Society and Solitude, Emerson wrote, "Here again, as so often, Nature delights to put us between extreme antagonisms, and our safety is in the skill with which we keep the diagonal line. Solitude is impractical. We must keep our head in the one and our hands in the other. The conditions are met if we keep our independence, yet do not lose our sympathy. I implore all of us to keep our independence, but never lose our sense of sympathy, especially during the age of COVID.